General Zogtron was in a foul mood as he watched yet another of his grand warships erupt into a dazzling fireworks display. The human cruiser sliced through the wreckage like a chef's knife through an overcooked steak. The bridge of the flagship was so tense you could cut it with a dull butter knife. His officers were dead silent, their eyes glued to the chaotic light show on the tactical screen. This was supposed to be a breeze, a quick and efficient culling of these pesky humans who had dared to challenge the overwhelming might of the Zorblat Collective. What should have been a routine extermination had become a never-ending slog. General, the humans are attempting to board our forward assault ships, Lieutenant Xylo reported, his tone laced with disbelief. What now? Zogtron snapped. They're using what? Primitive weapons, sir, Xylo said, almost apologetically. We don't have any records of them. Primitive? Zogtron's mandibles clacked with incredulity. You're telling me that after all our fleet's firepower, after incinerating entire worlds, these humans are now trying to board our ships with sticks and stones? That's correct, General. They seem to be using something called swords. Metal blades. No energy signatures. Purely kinetic, Xylo said, his voice becoming more strained. Zogtron stared at the lieutenant, his eyes narrowing into slits. Swords? Are you malfunctioning, Xylo? This is no time for jokes. No malfunction, sir. Confirmed by multiple sources, Xylo said, his gaze firmly fixed on the incoming data. They're using what appears to be medieval weaponry. For a moment, Zogtron was speechless. The Zorblat had dominated the galaxy with advanced energy weapons, particle beams, and starships capable of turning entire planets into cosmic dust. The idea that humans would resort to such ancient weapons in the face of overwhelming firepower was not just absurd, it was downright insulting. And what are our soldiers doing about this? Zogtron demanded, his voice rising in agitation. They're dying, sir, Xylo said quietly. The room fell silent. Zogtron's eyes widened. Dying, he repeated, his voice barely audible. The tactical display showed human forces slicing through the Zorblat ship's corridors with alarming efficiency. Zorblat soldiers, elite warriors trained to engage from a distance with energy rifles and plasma grenades, were falling one by one. The humans were bypassing shields, shrugging off blasts that should have turned them into space debris, and getting up close, far too close. Those swords, those rudimentary blades, were doing the unthinkable. I need to see this, Zogtron growled, his voice low and menacing. Patch the feed to the main display. The enormous screen at the front of the bridge flickered, and then focused on a live feed from one of the forward ships. The camera, attached to a Zorblat soldier's helmet, showed a group of humans charging down a corridor. Their armor was battered and scorched, nothing like the sleek, shielded suits of the Zorblat. It was rough, practical, and built for function rather than style. In their hands, they carried long blades, swords with edges that gleamed wickedly. The Zorblat soldiers fired their weapons in disciplined volleys. Energy bolts crackled down the corridor. Some humans fell, but others kept coming, closing the distance with frightening speed. The first human reached the Zorblat line, his sword flashing in a lethal arc. The helmet camera jerked wildly as the soldier was cut down, and then the feed went dead. Zogtron clenched his fists, his claws digging into his palms. What in the void are those blades made of? Unknown, sir, Xylo replied, his voice strained. But they're cutting through our armor like it's butter. The feed switched to another corridor from a different angle. The scene was the same. Humans charging forward with gleaming swords, moving with unnerving fluidity and precision. Their strikes were lethal and exact. Zorblat soldiers were torn apart, their bodies cleaved by these brutal, simple weapons. Zogtron watched in stunned silence. He had seen countless battles and ordered the deaths of billions, but this was madness. The humans should have been easy prey, outmatched in every way. Yet here they were, turning the tide with blades forged in fire and wielded with savage efficiency. Sir, they're breaching our command ship, Xylo said suddenly, breaking the silence. They've already boarded the lower decks. A cold dread settled over Zogtron. His ship was the heart of the fleet. Its destruction would spell the end of the Zorblat presence in this sector. if the humans were already inside. "Seal the bridge," Zogtron ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting around him. "Prepare for close-quarters combat." The doors of the bridge slid shut, heavy blast shields locking into place. The Zorblat officers around Zogtron readied themselves, drawing their sidearms and positioning defensively. These weren't warriors accustomed to hand-to-hand combat. Their kind had evolved beyond such crude methods long ago, relying instead on technology and superior firepower. The lights flickered and dimmed as the power system struggled to keep up with the damage the ship was sustaining. Zogtron could hear the distant sounds of battle growing closer, the clang of metal against metal, the screams of the dying. It felt like something out of an ancient war, a conflict from the Dark Ages when battles were fought face-to-face with blood, sweat, and steel. General Zogtron's teeth ground together as the clangs and shouts of battle grew nearer. The bridge was plunged into eerie dimness, the only light coming from the dimmed consoles and the occasional flicker of emergency lights. The Zorblat officers around him were a mix of confusion and resolve, clutching their sidearms as if they might offer some protection against the impending chaos. Lieutenant Xylo stood beside Zogtron, his eyes darting between the tactical displays and the door that separated them from the chaos beyond. "General, we've got multiple breaches on Deck 3. The humans are making their way up. They're not stopping." Zogtron's eyes narrowed. Of course they're not stopping. They got a knack for persistence, apparently. And we're sitting ducks here? The doors to the bridge, reinforced as they were, shuddered under the impact of the human assaults. Each crash was a jarring reminder that the invaders were only a step away from overrunning the heart of Zorblat's fleet. "Prepare for hand-to-hand combat," Zogtron ordered. "I want every officer here to be ready. No one leaves this bridge." There was a murmur of assent as the officers moved into defensive positions. Zogtron himself took up a defensive stance near the command console, his eyes locked on the door as if willing it to hold. A sudden loud bang echoed through the corridor, and the door trembled violently. The emergency lights cast long shadows on the walls, creating a grim dance of silhouettes that only added to the mounting tension. The officers exchanged uneasy glances, the clanging sounds growing louder and closer. Lieutenant Xylo wiped sweat from his brow. "General, I'm getting reports from our outer defenses. They're falling back, unable to hold the line. The humans are too fast, too efficient." "Of course they are," Zogtron muttered, more to himself than anyone. "They've turned an ancient relic into a weapon of war." The door to the bridge finally gave way with a screech, and a small group of humans burst through, their faces obscured by the battered remnants of their helmets. The moment they entered, the Zorblat officers opened fire, energy bolts streaming towards the intruders. To Zogtron's astonishment, the humans didn't just duck and weave. They charged forward, their swords flashing in the dim light. The Zorblat's energy bolts did little more than singe the air around them as the humans ducked and wove with surprising agility. One of the humans swung his blade, and a Zorblat officer's weapon was cleaved in half with a metallic clang. Zogtron's eyes widened in disbelief as a human soldier, who appeared more battered than the others, charged straight at him. "General!" Xylo shouted, trying to pull Zogtron out of harm's way. But Zogtron was frozen in place, his mind racing. With a swift, practiced move, the human swung his sword at Zogtron's defensive position. Zogtron barely managed to deflect the blow with his own weapon, a traditional Zorblat energy baton that sparked and hissed under the impact. He countered with a retaliatory strike, but the human danced out of the way with a grin that suggested he was thoroughly enjoying the game. Zogtron's mandibles clicked in frustration. "I should have studied these primitive tactics more closely," he muttered, trying to anticipate the human's next move. The battle in the bridge was a chaotic blur of flashing lights, clashing metal, and the occasional burst of energy fire. Zogtron, despite his best efforts, found himself struggling to keep up with the relentless advance of the human warriors. His normally disciplined and efficient officers were now caught in a frantic melee, their advanced technology proving almost useless in close-quarters combat. Just as Zogtron felt the tide of battle was about to overwhelm them, a loud, metallic clang echoed through the bridge as one of the human soldiers was thrown against the wall, incapacitated by a well-placed strike from one of Zogtron's officers. Zogtron barely had time to process the victory before another human soldier lunged at him, his sword glinting dangerously close. In a last-ditch effort, Zogtron swung his baton with all his might, catching the human off guard and sending him crashing into a console. The human grunted, struggling to rise. He was quickly surrounded by Zogtron's officers, who finally seemed to regain their composure. Together, they managed to subdue the remaining intruders, though not without significant effort and casualties. Breathing heavily, Zogtron surveyed the damage. The bridge was in disarray. Overturned consoles, scattered equipment, and the bodies of both Zorblat and human combatants lay strewn about. The walls bore the marks of a fierce and brutal struggle. "Report," Zogtron demanded, his voice heavy with exhaustion. Lieutenant Xylo approached, his face pale but resolute. "We've repelled the initial boarding, sir, but the humans have taken several sections of the ship. Our outer defenses are still compromised." "Get the ship stabilized," Zogtron ordered. "I want a full damage report and all personnel accounted for. And someone, for the love of the void, find out how these humans have managed to turn swords into such a devastating weapon." As the Zorblat officers moved to carry out his orders, Zogtron stood in the midst of the wreckage, his mind racing. This battle was far from over, and the humans had just demonstrated that their resilience and their weapons were far more formidable than he had ever imagined. The Zorblat were in for a fight unlike any they had faced before, and Zogtron knew that to win, they would have to adapt quickly, or risk being overrun by the most unlikely of foes. General Zogtron slumped into his command chair, the weight of the recent skirmish pressing heavily upon him. The bridge, though temporarily secured, looked like a war zone. Officers worked tirelessly to restore order and assess the damage while medics attended to the wounded. The flickering lights and occasional pings from damaged systems added to the chaotic atmosphere. Lieutenant Xylo approached, his face etched with concern. "General, we've managed to regain control of the bridge and the immediate corridors, but the situation is still dire. The humans have breached several critical systems, and their forces are moving through the ship with alarming efficiency." Zogtron rubbed his mandibles, trying to think clearly amidst the disarray. "What about the other ships in the fleet? Are they holding?" "Not well, sir. The humans have managed to disrupt communication and coordination among our vessels. Several are reporting heavy damage and breaches. We've lost contact with the flagship of our assault fleet." Zogtron's eyes narrowed. "And the outer defenses?" "Compromised," Xylo admitted. "They've managed to disable most of our defensive turrets. We're currently scrambling to restore them, but it's slow going." Zogtron's frustration boiled over. "This is unacceptable. We need to regain control, and fast. I want a full report on the status of our remaining forces and a plan to counter the human threat." As the officers scrambled to follow orders, Zogtron took a deep breath, trying to regain his composure. The humans' unexpected tenacity and skill had shaken his confidence, and the reality of their situation was beginning to sink in. Suddenly, an alert flashed on Zogtron's console. A distress signal from one of the auxiliary ships, the Sovereign Flare. The message was garbled, but the words "human" and "help" were clear. "What is this?" Zogtron demanded. Xylo quickly scanned the incoming message. "General, it appears the Sovereign Flare is under attack, but they're requesting assistance. It's highly irregular for them to ask for help from a ship that's engaged in combat." "Unusual indeed," Zogtron said. "Could this be a trap?" "It's possible," Xylo replied, "but it could also be a genuine plea for help." Zogtron pondered for a moment. The Zorblat were known for their strategic prowess, but the humans had a way of turning the tables in unexpected ways. It was possible that the distress signal was a trick, but if it was genuine, it could be an opportunity to regroup and counterattack. "Very well," Zogtron decided. "Prepare a small response team and send them to the Sovereign Flare. I want a thorough assessment of the situation and any intelligence on the human forces. If it's a trap, we'll deal with it. If it's a genuine request for help, we'll provide assistance and use the opportunity to reorganize." "Yes, sir," Xylo said, already moving to implement the order. The response team, led by Commander Varnak, boarded a small, heavily armed shuttle and made their way to the Sovereign Flare. The journey was tense, with the shuttle sensors picking up intermittent signals from the damaged ship. As they approached, the site of the battered vessel came into view. The Sovereign Flare was a mess. Hull breaches, flames licking out from damaged compartments, and intermittent bursts of energy fire. The team docked and hurried inside, their weapons at the ready. The interior was eerily quiet. The crew of the Sovereign Flare had managed to hold the bridge, but it was clear that the ship had suffered extensive damage. Commander Varnak approached the captain of the Sovereign Flare, Captain Relin, who was overseeing the repairs with a strained expression. "Captain Relin, report," Varnak ordered, his voice firm. Relin looked up, relief flashing across his face. "Commander Varnak, we're grateful for the assistance. The humans have been relentless. We've been holding them off as best as we can, but our systems are failing, and they're making their way toward critical areas of the ship." Varnak frowned. "Why the distress signal? Why not just engage with the humans?" Relin sighed. "We're running low on munitions, and our defenses are nearly down. We've managed to push the humans back, but they're using some sort of tactic we haven't encountered before. They're coordinated, resourceful, and they've got more firepower than we initially thought." "Understood," Varnak said. "We'll provide immediate support. Is there any specific information you can provide about their tactics or weaponry?" Captain Relin nodded, pulling up a holographic display. "They're using a mix of energy weapons and those damnable swords. They seem to have some sort of advanced technology integrated with their primitive weapons. It's thrown off our usual strategies." Varnak studied the display. "All right, we'll reinforce your defenses and work on countermeasures. In the meantime, I need you to keep your crew safe and maintain what control you can." As the Zorblat response team began their work, Varnak and Relin's combined efforts managed to stabilize the Sovereign Flare. Reinforcements were sent, and new defensive strategies were implemented. The humans, though persistent, faced a more formidable opposition as the Zorblat regained their footing. Meanwhile, back on the bridge of Zogtron's flagship, the general paced restlessly. The news from the Sovereign Flare was both troubling and promising. The human forces were proving to be an unprecedented challenge, but the opportunity to regroup and learn more about their tactics could turn the tide of battle. Zogtron knew that the conflict with humanity was far from over. The humans had shown an uncanny ability to adapt and fight back with surprising effectiveness. But the Zorblat were not about to back down. They would learn from their encounters, adjust their strategies, and if necessary, evolve their own tactics to ensure victory. As the battle raged on, Zogtron and his forces prepared for the next phase of their campaign, a campaign that would demand every ounce of their strategic prowess and resilience. The humans had thrown a wrench into their plans, but Zogtron was determined to turn the situation to his advantage. And so, the struggle continued, with both sides locked in a high-stakes game of strategy and survival. The outcome remained uncertain, but one thing was clear: the war had only just begun. The war had dragged on longer than General Zogtron had anticipated. The humans, with their surprising resilience and adaptability, had forced the Zorblat to reevaluate their approach. Every corner of their fleet bore the scars of the conflict, and the relentless clash had begun to take its toll on morale. On the bridge of Zogtron's flagship, the general looked out at the tactical display, his face a mask of determination. The Zorblat had regrouped and adapted, but the humans were still proving to be a formidable challenge. Despite their best efforts, they hadn't been able to break the human resistance completely. Lieutenant Xylo entered the bridge, looking both anxious and hopeful. "General, we've managed to stabilize the remaining ships and reinforce our defenses. We've also gathered some valuable intelligence on the humans' tactics and weaknesses." "Good," Zogtron said, his tone clipped but grateful. "What have we learned?" "The humans are heavily reliant on their energy weapons and swords. Their tactics are surprisingly fluid, and they've developed a knack for exploiting any weakness in our defenses," Xylo explained. "However, we've identified a critical vulnerability. Their command structure relies heavily on a few key leaders. If we can eliminate these leaders, it might disrupt their coordination." Zogtron's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "So if we target their command centers, we might be able to turn the tide in our favor." That's the idea, Xylo said. We've pinpointed their primary command vessel, the Indomitable Spirit. If we can launch a focused assault and take it down, it could potentially cripple their entire operation. Very well, Zogtron said, his gaze resolute. Prepare an assault force. I want to hit the Indomitable Spirit with everything we've got. This is our chance to end this conflict once and for all. As the Zorblat forces prepared for the decisive strike, the human command vessel floated ominously in the distance. The Indomitable Spirit was a massive ship, its hull scarred from previous battles, but still a potent symbol of human resilience. The Zorblat fleet assembled for the assault, their ships positioned for a coordinated attack. The assault began with a barrage of energy weapons and missiles, the space around the Indomitable Spirit illuminated by the explosions and flashing lights. The humans, taken by surprise, scrambled to defend their vessel. The Zorblat forces pressed their advantage, pushing through the human defenses with relentless determination. On the bridge of the Indomitable Spirit, Captain Alara, a seasoned human commander, was coordinating the defense with intense focus. The sudden onslaught had thrown her crew into disarray, but her calm leadership kept them moving. Reinforce the port shields, Captain Alara ordered. Divert all power to energy weapons and prepare for counterattack. The human crew worked quickly, their experience and training evident in their swift response. Despite the Zorblat's overwhelming firepower, the humans managed to stabilize their defenses and counter the assault. General Zogtron watched the battle unfold from his command ship, his frustration mounting. The humans were putting up an unexpectedly strong resistance. He knew that they were close to breaking through, but the human commander's tenacity was proving to be a significant obstacle. Redouble the attack, Zogtron ordered. Focus all fire on the Indomitable Spirit. As the Zorblat forces pressed their attack, the human vessel began to falter. Hull breaches and internal explosions shook the Indomitable Spirit, but Captain Alara refused to give in. She coordinated her crew's efforts to keep the ship functional and maintain their defense. General Zogtron, Lieutenant Xylo said, his voice urgent, "We've identified the command center on the Indomitable Spirit. If we can breach it, we'll take out their leadership and disrupt their operations." Zogtron nodded, his eyes glinting with determination. "Send a boarding team. I want that command center secured." A specialized Zorblat boarding party, equipped with advanced breaching technology, was dispatched to the Indomitable Spirit. They fought their way through the human defenses, their progress marked by intense combat and fierce resistance. Inside the command center of the Indomitable Spirit, Captain Alara and her remaining officers were working frantically to fend off the Zorblat attackers. The battle was fierce, but Alara's leadership kept the crew fighting. Zogtron's boarding team, led by Commander Varnak, finally breached the command center. The two sides clashed in a chaotic melee, the room filled with the sounds of clashing weapons and shouting. Alara, determined to protect her crew and ship, fought fiercely, but the Zorblat's superior numbers and tactics began to take their toll. In a final, desperate move, Alara fought her way to Zogtron, determined to face him personally. Their eyes locked as they engaged in combat. Zogtron, his energy baton flashing, fought with a blend of skill and rage, while Alara, with her sword flashing, demonstrated the same fierce determination. As they fought, Zogtron's anger and frustration were palpable. He couldn't believe how hard it was to subdue this single human leader. But Alara's resolve was equally strong. She knew that if she fell, the rest of her crew might lose hope. In a climactic clash, Zogtron managed to land a decisive blow, disarming Alara and forcing her to the ground. Breathing heavily, he stood over her, his victory almost within reach. "You fought well," Zogtron said, his voice tinged with grudging respect. "But this ends now." Alara looked up at him, her gaze unwavering. "You might win today, but you'll never break our spirit." As the Zorblat forces secured the command center, the remaining human resistance began to crumble. The loss of their command vessel and key leaders had a profound impact on the human forces. They fought fiercely, but were unable to regroup effectively. With the Indomitable Spirit crippled and its leadership taken down, the Zorblat forces pressed their advantage. The remaining human ships were systematically subdued, and the Zorblat fleet emerged victorious. As the battle subsided, Zogtron stood on the bridge of his flagship, surveying the aftermath. The humans had proven to be a challenging adversary, and the conflict had been hard-fought. But the Zorblat had achieved their objective. Lieutenant Xylo approached, a weary but triumphant look on his face. "General, we've secured the sector. The human threat has been neutralized." Zogtron nodded, his expression one of satisfaction mixed with reflection. "Well done. We've learned much from this conflict. The humans were more formidable than we anticipated, but we've emerged victorious." Xylo looked at Zogtron, his gaze thoughtful. "What now, General?" Zogtron looked out at the stars, contemplating the future. "We rebuild and learn from this experience. The universe is full of surprises, and we must be ready for whatever comes next." The Zorblat fleet began the process of recovery and reconstruction, their victory hard-earned but significant. The conflict with humanity had tested their limits and forced them to adapt, and the lessons learned would shape their future strategies. As the stars glimmered in the vast expanse of space, General Zogtron knew that the galaxy was a place of endless possibilities and challenges. The war with humanity had ended, but the journey of discovery and adaptation was just beginning. And whatever the future held, the Zorblat were ready to face it with renewed strength and determination.